Well, if you haven't been watching Barbie, you've probably been watching Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is in the news. Everyone's rushing to see the film. I alone may be the one who hasn't seen it yet. But since you can't spoil this movie, I think I can talk about it freely in my sermon, just for a moment. I haven't seen it, but it's history. So I know that it's been acclaimed as a fantastically filmed, amazingly told story of this complicated man in this dark period in American history and this complex project, the Manhattan Project. And they quote Oppenheimer with his famous line after the Trinity test is complete at Los Alamos. He says, "I am maker of death, destroyer of worlds." So whether they romanticize when and how he says it in the film, he is known to have said those words from the Bhagavad Gita when he did see the effect of his hard work there. And there's no mincing those words. I am maker of death, destroyer of worlds, and history played that out. Today, August 6th, is the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. And 3 days later, the United States bombed Nagasaki. So it's a week of remembrance. The Manhattan Project in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these are inexplicable things outside the context of World War II. And we all collectively considered it the lesser of evils to have the United States create this technology before the Nazi regime could do so in Germany. And it's well accepted that the bombings helped bring a quicker end to World War II and possibly prevent even worse atrocities. But to my mind, none of these justifications make these bombings any less evil. If anything, it puts in high relief just how limitless our power to kill and destroy can be. And moreover, we can find a way to call these things good, even as we disfigure and maim our world. The irony is not lost and should not be lost on any of us that today is also August 6th, the Feast of the Transfiguration. This story is so familiar to us. It appears in all three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's recalled in Peter's second letter that we heard this morning. And the story is familiar. In art around the world, icons, paintings depict this story in beautiful ways. They depict the blinding light, the overshadowing cloud, Moses and Elijah appearing next to Jesus. These depictions show the disciples in all their sleepiness, sometimes falling at the feet of the three figures. And they'll capture maybe Peter pointing, let's build dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. I used to work at St. Bartholomew's Church in Midtown Manhattan, where the apse is the image of the Transfiguration, and it's a glistening, beautiful image. And you can see it from the very back of the church. But what cannot be depicted, and what is not generally depicted in these artworks, is the conversation that takes place between Jesus and Moses and Elijah. The conversation is all about Jesus' death, his imminent departure, which he will accomplish at Jerusalem, as Luke writes it. And that's a kind of euphemistic language for he's about to be tortured and killed and buried as a criminal. And they're there to assure him, stay the course, you're on the right path, and to encourage him. And the disciples see this scene, but it's not clear whether they really understood or heard the conversation. So Peter, being the archetype for us all, would like to just, take a picture of it and remember this moment and stay there. And I think being our archetype, we don't understand the scene that well either. In churches, we commemorate this day, and in art, we commemorate it as a joyful, mountaintop celebration. And it is a revelation of Jesus' glory, his identity. And this event happens for the disciples to give them something to look back on that they will understand later. For Jesus, it's for that moment right now to bolster him in his difficult path. And in reality, this is a sobering preparation for the worst. And though he's assured he's on the right path. But all in all, it's sort of a downer of a mountaintop experience. And that's something that we miss when we just look at the art or hear the story again with the same old mindset. But Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem to be tortured, killed, and buried. And he was embracing his choice to suffer violence, just to show us just how violent we can be, and in order to forgive us for that violence and give us a new way to live. The verses immediately before this scene in Luke say, they are Jesus telling his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will save it." And on the other side of this story, the end bracket of this scene, when they go down the mountain, the very first thing Jesus does is heals a little boy. He finds a boy in a description that might fit epilepsy or some kind of seizures, and that's the first thing he does after his transfiguration, is to heal a little boy. So going up the mountain with Jesus means coming down with him to practice a path of healing and life-giving action, a path of nonviolence, loving our neighbor, forgiving one another, willingness to suffer the violence of others, to forgive them and to find ways to reconcile, and to do unto others as we'd have them do unto us, putting down our weapons, loving our enemies. No wonder the disciples were terrified. Gandhi famously said, "Jesus was the most active, nonviolent resistor known to history. But the only people who don't know Jesus is nonviolent are Christians." But we have all kinds of opportunities to practice nonviolence in our lives. This is not all about protesting war and protesting nuclear weapons. It is that for many, thank God, and for some, a special calling. But in our daily lives, in all the ways that we respond to the people in our path, all the ways that we speak to one another, do we speak with violence or do we speak with gentleness? Can we receive their pain and acknowledge their lack of having been loved and see God in them enough to not treat them with violence? And violence, it's a strong word, but it's violent to say hurtful things to each other. It's violent to not be forgiving. And in our world of disagreement and arguing and siloing off into our own points of view, we don't have ways of conversing with each other that are gentle. So these are our opportunity to practice the path of Jesus. It's very hard and it can be terrifying, but this is the path, is to walk this path of nonviolence. And the disciples did come to understand what Jesus was doing up there on the mountain. After the resurrection, Jesus, in his state, exploded with light and love for the world and for the cosmos. And his followers experienced that in the resurrection. And they went and were transfigured themselves to go and live like he did. So today we hold in tension these two events, these two images, the Transfiguration and the events of Hiroshima. And Dorothy Day called the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki the anti-transfiguration. It's not lost on me the mirroring images we have with these two events. At the Transfiguration, Jesus is revealed as the God of peace. He's ablaze with the spiritual power of his commitment to unconditional love and the path of peace and nonviolence. He is the radiant light of the world and the fullness of embodiment of love and peace for the whole human race. He is God's Son, the beloved, to whom we are to listen. At the anti-transfiguration, instead of bringing reconciliation and peace and restraint to the human race, we realized history-altering powers for death, disfiguration, and self-destruction. Both of these stories feature a blinding light, an overshadowing cloud, fear in those who witness them. In the first act of coming off the mountain, Jesus heals the little boy. At Hiroshima, the bomb was called Little Boy and killed 100,000 and more people. In both of these stories, the voice from the cloud comes. Out of the cloud of Hiroshima, U.S. planes showered Japan with leaflets threatening more use of this deadly weapon. Surrender or else, they said. 3 days later, Nagasaki. From the cloud that overshadowed Jesus at the Transfiguration came a voice from heaven. This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. Can we hear Jesus' voice of love and forgiveness and nonviolence in the disquieting world we live in? Can we hear his active resistance to death and destruction and hear his courageous love of enemy? Can we see that we are made in the image of God, like everyone else? And seeing that and acknowledging that, can we love and hold out hope for one another, no matter how far gone we think each other is? It's about our daily lives. Just start with the way that we communicate. John Deere, the Jesuit priest and Red Cross chaplains organizer after 9/11, wrote a book about the Transfiguration and its implications for our Christian lives. And in it, he recalls having asked Daniel Berrigan, the Jesuit poet and anti-war activist, years before about entering into the life of ministry. And he asked Berrigan about the kind of life he should lead. He said to Berrigan, "What is the point of all of this?" And Berrigan answered him, "All we have to do is make our lives fit into the story of Jesus. We have to get our lives to make sense in light of the gospel." This is our challenge today. How does our life make sense in light of the gospel? How do we fit into the story of Jesus? And like Peter said, can we be a lamp shining into all the dark places? Amen.